Whether I'm writing a letter or a sermon, I like to have background music on to assist my creative process. A convenient way I have done this is by playing songs from an electronic library I've created and saved on YouTube. The nice thing about this is that I don't have to carry around a lot of CDs or even store music files on my laptop. All I need is access to the internet so I can log into my account and click play. It had been easy a couple of weeks ago, or until a few days ago, when I began having a pop-up notification stating that YouTube has updated their terms and conditions, and it was recommended that I read the new terms so I can agree to their new privacy policy. Thankfully, I've had the option to click accept, decline, or ignore, and so for the last 2 weeks, I've simply clicked ignore so I can get onto my login screen and access my library. That option has worked until this past Tuesday when I no longer had the option to click ignore. My options were limited to clicking the agree button to accept the updated terms and conditions, or I could click decline, which would prevent me from accessing my account. In addition to having the agree button, I also had to check a little box that said I had read and understood the terms and conditions. Ugh, I thought as I opened the document to read the new terms and conditions and saw that this was a lengthy document. I only read a few lines and then gave up because I had things to do, things to write, and this document was just way too lengthy. Therefore, I just skipped the rest of the document, clicked the little box saying I agreed, and then resigning to the fact that it really won't matter if there's something in there I disagree with, I went ahead and clicked it because I needed access to my music library, and I'm going to have to just agree to their terms. According to the company, TOSDR, yeah, that's their name, they take their name from an acronym, which is TL:DR, or too long, didn't read. They claim I'm not alone in accepting the terms and conditions, even if I didn't read them. On their website, they post that the terms and conditions and privacy policies have continued to grow longer and longer, so that they are typically over 2,500 words in the agreement. Assuming one can read 250 words a minute, it would take most people at least 10 minutes to read through the entire policy. And in an article that appeared in The Atlantic, the author claimed that if we were to read through all the privacy policies we have on our computers, tablets, and phones, it would take us 76 days to read through it all. And even if you took the time to read through the privacy policies, the big question remains: would you really say no and thus lose access to documents or your files, or even lose the ability to use the program that created such files? So think about this. Perhaps if it was a video game, you might say, skip it. But what if it was an app that had your passwords stored on it? You might not be so quick to say no. And then, as TOSDR claims, many of us feel forced to click the little box that says we read and understood the terms and conditions, and then we agree to be bound to them, and we move on. But, they say, if we actually read what was included in the agreement, we might think twice about being so quick to click agree. For example, clicking agree to accept the privacy policy for Facebook grants them permission to track your phone's location so they can sell that geocache information to ad companies. Or accepting the policy from Google gives them permission to read your private email messages and to track your web activity. In addition, both companies include language that you agree to waive your rights to privacy or to hold the companies harmless in the event of a data breach. But what choice do we have? And though we click agree to these policies and move on, clearly there is a lot more at stake. And as this relates to Jesus' call for us to follow him, when we agree to accept Jesus' invitation to follow him, we discover there is more at stake there as well, which can be a good thing, mostly. But what about when faith journey gets tough? Or we're asked to trust God to provide for our needs instead of relying on ourselves for answers? This can be difficult, especially when we struggle to make sense of our budget for next year, or when starting new ministries sounds threatening, or even moves us beyond our comfort zones or expectations. It can also be soul-crushing when our ministry outreach and attempts to do good in the community are rejected by the very community we're trying to serve, or volunteers to assist our efforts are lacking. At those times, I recall the difficulties the disciples faced. They were forced to leave their hometowns, being accused of blasphemy and heresy and for disturbing the peace. Not taking rejection well, the disciples begged Jesus to let them escape to the countryside and avoid the towns where they were not welcomed. And on at least one occasion, Peter asked Jesus to call down a meteor bomb strike upon his enemies. Yet Jesus refrained from doing so and taught his disciples to have compassion for their enemies. And he told them to have patience for the misguided. Thinking about the opposition the disciples faced and experienced, I wonder if they understood that this is what they were getting themselves into when they agreed to follow Jesus. Did they read the terms and conditions? Apparently not. After all, the gospel authors report that when Jesus walked around Galilee and called the disciples by name, saying, "Come, follow me," they did, immediately. And based on these reports, it appears the disciples skipped reading the terms and conditions, threw caution to the wind as they chose to follow Jesus, and perhaps they hoped that by following Jesus and skipping over the terms and conditions, things would just work out in the end. Considering the actions of the Christians in Thessalonica, it appears that, like the disciples, they skipped reading the terms and conditions when they hit the accept button, and they too hoped everything would just work its way out. However, as Paul states in his letter to them, one cannot just click accept and float through faith sitting around waiting for Jesus to return, which, based on Paul's letter, apparently some in the church assumed they could do. There were some in the church who believed Jesus would return soon, like any minute. And they were so concerned that Jesus would return, they believed they wouldn't be found ready for his return. So some refused to do anything, nor go anywhere, because they believed that Jesus could arrive while they were away, and they would miss out. So they chose to sit and wait, doing nothing. Paul was astonished at their inaction, because in his view, their waiting around for Jesus to arrive, though commendable because they had faith he would return, was also an insult to Christians who had accepted the terms and conditions set forth by Jesus and were busy doing kingdom work. Hardworking Christians had read the terms and conditions and understood what it meant to be Jesus' followers. And to utilize last week's topic, these hardworking Christians went wide, high, and deep with their faith as they served the poor, fed the hungry, and contributed to the needs of the community. They received God's vision and worked patiently with each other to build a world of care, and they remained connected to God through service. Paul declared that anyone who was not actively involved in kingdom work was walking idly in faith or being busybodies, which is defined by Paul as being persons who are busy doing their own thing but not God's thing. And he stated that busybodies were lazy, obnoxious, and got in the way of others. They were actively keeping others from doing the work of the community and interfered with the faithful work the community was called to accomplish. Paul demanded that these persons get up and get to work. He said, imitate Jesus. Paul also demanded they imitate him, imitate his work ethic and willingness to remain faithfully active for God, which he displayed when he was visiting their congregation. He highlighted his own works of faith and declared that God commanded us to work, to serve, and live together in unity because God does not want tourist disciples. This phrase, tourist disciples, was something I discovered while staying at the Iona community in Scotland. When I signed up to stay at the Iona community during my sabbatical, I had to agree to the terms and conditions of the community, which stated that I had to agree to participate in daily chores with other participants at the Iona Center. This meant I would change bed sheets, sweep the floors in the main hall, wash dishes, clean the restrooms, and assist with meal preparations and general cleanup, along with attending classrooms and worship and participating with persons who lived in the community. And I recall on the first day of orientation at the Abbey, we were discussing the expectations of this covenant we had signed when one of the participants, who was shocked to discover they had agreed to do chores when they signed up for this group, they claimed they didn't see that when they signed up because, they admitted, they didn't actually read it. The person in charge just looked at him for a brief moment, clearly hearing this form of protest before, and said to the person, "Just because you didn't see it doesn't mean that it isn't there." And then remarked, "What? You came to be a tourist disciple? Refusal to participate with others in doing daily chores meant we were just like the tourists if we refused who came to see the Abbey. These tourists would sometimes just watch us do our daily chores, but they never offered to help. And in some ways, they contributed to the muddy footprints that needed swept and mopped every day. Tourists. But we are asked to be more than tourists. We are invited into this community of faith to work, to serve, to pray, and to live in unity. We are called to faithful service, trusting that God remains with us. And whether we read the terms and conditions or not, when we agreed to follow Jesus, we accepted his terms and conditions, and thus we agreed to be active in the life of the community and not be mere tourist disciples. We agreed to go deep with our trust of God. We agreed to increasingly widen our reach, and through our ministry missions, we would reach out to a broad range of people. And we agreed to work with God to fulfill God's vision for us, for the world, and for the church, as Paul reminded the church writing that we should not tire from our labors. One reason Paul probably focused on this faithful action was that he was aware that it's difficult to persevere as a Christian, especially when our good deeds are met with resistance, or when we pour our energy and soul into a project, but the gains are absent or seem so little or not enough. Or when we identify as Jesus followers, we are met with social and political opposition, as Jesus highlighted, saying, "You will be hated by all because of my name." At those difficult moments, we may want to give up and become idle. Yet beyond the fact that we signed up for this faithful service, we are reminded that our work is not done in vain, because it is our faith and our faithfulness which is rewarded. We are informed by the prophet Samuel that our acts of faith will have their own reward, as he declared that the Lord rewards everyone for their righteousness and faithfulness. Remaining faithful to God and to our call, we set forth to do the work that lies before us, not bemoaning it, nor being busybodies about it, nor even sitting idly by as others do our work. Instead, we are encouraged to do the work that God calls us to do, both with faithfulness and courage, as Paul reminded the congregation, saying, "Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord, not for human masters, since you know that you will receive an inheritance from the Lord as a reward. For it is the Lord, Christ, you are serving." Jesus initiated the call for us to follow him. And if we agree to his call, then we agree to the terms and conditions which he established, which includes risks, as Jesus highlighted in Luke 21. And as it's understood as a call to do God's work, we are servants to each other to bring physical and spiritual healing to our community through our Christ-like living. Agreeing to the terms and conditions established by Jesus, we also live in community together, providing a welcome where outsiders and others want to belong, providing a ministry where people want to be a part of it so they increase in their faith as well. Jesus didn't call us to be tourist disciples. He called us to join with him in ministry, which comes with rewards and includes risks and costs. As we join with him as participants to do kingdom work, we are asked this morning to consider, do you click decline or do you click agree? Agreeing to his call, accepting the terms and conditions that are included with this call to discipleship.